Hello, petals. How are you doing? How are things going? How's your week been? Right, this one's might be in 2 parts because it's quite a long chapter, but I will do my very best. And if I'm going to do it in 2 parts, I'll make sure I mark it up. But I really would rather do it in just one. So we'll just have to see how it goes. But first and foremost, how are you doing? How are things? How's everything going? Thank you for all the comments. I am a bit behind because I have Doggo in here with me. The Doggo, because obviously Yuvi's left us, so just trying to keep Ellie all calm and mellow, so she's up with me. And she's now looking at me because I'm talking. You can hear her wagging in the background probably. So as soon as I start talking, she's like, "What's going on, Mama?" Eh? So yes, we now have Ellie with us during recordings, so that will be awesome. But yes, I will catch up with all my messages and everything, and then we can move on and along as we do. Cheapers, it's been a week. Right, my lovely, wonderful beings who are, I just appreciate all of you for all your kind comments and for being so nice. I know I'm a bit scattered at the moment, but we can get all this done. It's fine. It's fine. As ever, if you could hit the like button at the end if you enjoy the episode, leave a comment, hit the notifications bell, share, subscribe, whichever works for you. That would be awesome because it really does help the channel. Yay! Okay, so chapter 13 of Flying Dutch by Mr. Tom Holt, with the added bonus of the highest pollen count of the year so far. Whoop! "Oh," Montalban said. "Oh, that is most unfortunate. Would you care for some more tea?" "Not just now, thanks," said the Flying Dutchman. "Have you got official notice yet?" "Let me see." The professor stood up and walked over to an elegant Jacobean chair in the corner of the room. He pressed a knob on the carved side, and a telex printer appeared through the seat. "Ah, yes," said the professor. "It just came through this minute. You were right, dear me, this is most regrettable." "Regrettable?" Jane said. "Isn't that putting it rather mildly? I mean, the Dunray nuclear power station is about to blow up and take half of Northern Europe with it, and you say—" "Extremely regrettable, yes," said the professor. "Unfortunately, the telex doesn't give details. Perhaps I should telephone somebody." "Good idea," said Vanderdecker. "You go and do that." The professor wandered away, and Jane turned to Vanderdecker. Her face was white. "It was lucky we were there," Vanderdecker said. "We were just sailing along the Bristol Channel, minding our own business, when we happened to bump into the Ed Krieger again. You remember, that nuclear protest ship I told you about, with all those terribly earnest young people on it. They'd just come from Dunray, and they were seriously worried. They'd seen this sort of glow in the water, and they didn't like it one little bit. They tried to radio in to warn everyone, but of course nobody believes a word they say on that particular subject, so I asked them exactly what they'd seen, and when they explained, I guessed that there'd been some awful accident, and then we saw the destroyer, which was following the Erdkrieger. And the rest, you know." "But," Jane started to say. "Sorry?" "I mean," Jane said, "no offence, but what can you do?" Vanderdecker raised an eyebrow. "I would have thought that was obvious," he said. "After all, we are the only people in the world who can't do anything. That's if anything can be done, that is. But the professor can tell us that." "You mean because you can't be killed?" "Exactly," Vanderdecker said. "Everything always comes in handy sometime, as my grandmother used to say when she stowed away little bits of string, and in our case, it's invulnerability. Well, so far as we know, we're invulnerable, but I don't remember the elixir coming with labels saying invulnerability or your money back. This does not affect your statutory rights. Remains to be seen really now, doesn't it? That's why I brought Sebastian with me." "But you mustn't," Jane burst out. "Not if it's dangerous." Vanderdecker stared at her and then began to laugh. He laughed for a very long time, although he seemed to realise that it wasn't going down well with Jane. He couldn't seem to help it. He was still laughing when the professor came back in.
Most regrettable, said Montalban gravely. I blame myself, of course.
Jane scowled at him. You mean it's your fault? She snapped.
I suppose so, said the professor. If I had never developed nuclear fission, this would never have happened. Oh, well. What's happening? Vanderdecker asked. Was I right? Absolutely, said the professor. You were entirely correct in your diagnosis. I never knew you were a scientist. It's been a long time, hasn't it? Vanderdecker replied. And you never wrote. But what are they doing? They've evacuated the area, said the professor, and they're clearing the north of Scotland. But I don't think there will be time, and ideally one would prefer to evacuate Europe if one wanted to be on the safe side.
Would one really? Jane said. How regrettable.
You shut up, said Vanderdecker. You aren't helping. Look, Montalban, is there still time to do anything? Has the situation become critical? I'm afraid so, said the professor.
In his hand, entirely forgotten, was a stone-cold crumpet. He'd been carrying it about with him for at least 20 minutes. Narrator's note, that's absolute sacrilege, that is. You can't have stone-cold crumpets, that's just rude. Well, I suppose you could make a nice sandwich out of them after you've like nice toasted ones and then remelt it or something. I want crumpets now. Anyway, and also crumpets are not the same as English muffins. English muffins in America are just bread. Anyway, I digress. And the once molten butter had solidified into a translucent yellow film. Narrator's note, but although in theory the fire in the main chamber could still be controlled, so no human being could survive in there for more than 5 minutes, even with protective clothing. You see, my latest modifications. But the fire could still be put out, Vanderdecker said. How? Indeed, said the professor. How? No firefighting equipment could be taken in there. It would simply melt. Vanderdecker smiled.
Aren't you forgetting something? Very probably, said the professor. What? I'll give you 3 guesses, Vanderdecker replied. What's the one thing in the whole world that cannot be destroyed?
The professor thought for a moment, remembered the crumpet, and took a dainty bite off the rim of it. There was a crunching sound, as if he was eating a clear pigeon. Narrator's note, thank you for putting me off crumpets for life there, Mr. Holt. Actually, wait, nothing could put me off crumpets. I digress. Remembered the crumpet, and then took a dainty bite out of the rim of it. There was a crunching sound, as if he was eating a clear pigeon, and then he suddenly beamed.
My dear fellow, he said, you are, of course, perfectly correct. How remarkably intelligent of you. But, he added, there would be a certain amount of risk for all I know. Yes, well, said Vanderdecker. Anyway, don't you think we ought to be going? Of course, said the professor. Yes. Shall we take your helicopter or mine? Whichever you prefer, said Vanderdecker. Look, I hate to hurry you, but of course, I'll just get a few things, my instruments and perhaps a flask of coffee. No coffee, said the Flying Dutchman. No rich tea biscuits, no drop scones, no Dundee cake. Let's get a move on, and then we can all have tea.
The professor, slightly startled, hurried away.
We'll drop by the ship and pick up the rest of the crew, Vanderdecker was saying. I hope his helicopter's big enough.
Just what are you going to do? Jane demanded.
Put the fire out, Vanderdecker replied. What do you think? I'm not going all that way to a blazing nuclear reactor just to roast jacket potatoes.
But you can't, Jane said.
Very probably,
Vanderdecker said. How could he be so calm about it all?
But it's worth a go, and I've got nothing else planned.
You bloody fool! Jane screamed. You'll get killed!
Now then, said the Flying Dutchman, don't let Sebastian hear you talking like that. I don't want to raise the poor lad's hopes.
I don't believe it, Jane said, and realised that she was getting overexcited. An overexcited accountant, like the University of Hull, is a contradiction in terms. Nevertheless, you actually want to get killed, don't you? She exclaimed, and then was silent, mainly because she had unexpectedly run out of breath. Vanderdecker grinned at her.
Yes, he said, more than anything else in the whole world. In my position, wouldn't you? His eyes met hers, and she seemed to see 400 years of pointless, agonizing existence staring out at her. 400 years of weeks without weekends, without bank holidays, without 2 weeks in the summer in Tuscany, without Christmas, without birthdays, without even coming home in the evening and kicking off your shoes and watching a good film. Just millions of identical days full of nothing at all. She sat down and said nothing else until long after the helicopter had roared away into the distance. Then she started to cry, messily, until her mascara ran down all over her cheeks. Vanderdecker was not usually given to counting his blessings. Not because he was an unusually gloomy person, it was just that he had tried it once and it had taken him precisely 2 seconds. However, he said to himself, as the helicopter whirred through a cloud-cluttered sky towards Scotland, there is undoubtedly one thing I can be grateful for. However, he said to himself, as the helicopter whirred through a cloud-cluttered sky towards Scotland, there is undoubtedly one thing I can be grateful for. I haven't had to spend the last 400-odd years in one of these horrible things. Compared to this airborne food processor, the Verdun is entirely first-class accommodation. The journey had not been devoid of incident. For example, he had been so wrapped up in his thoughts that he hadn't noticed Sebastian sneakily opening the door and jumping out as they soared over the Lake District. In fact, had he not yelled out Geronimo as he launched himself into the air, they probably wouldn't have noticed his departure at all, and it would have taken even longer to find him than it did. Now, when at last they managed to locate him, after several tedious flypasts of Lake Coniston, he was lodged headfirst in the trunk of a hollow tree, and they had to use axes to get him loose. Narrator's note, beautiful area of the country, really quite like it. There was also the smell. Although they were high up in the sky, their passing gave rise to a wave of seething discomfort and discontent on the ground below, and they had had to skirt around the edges of large towns and cities to avoid mass panic. Even then, an RAF Hercules with which they had briefly shared a few 100,000 cubic feet of airspace had nearly flown into the Pennines. But none of these trivial excitements was sufficient to keep the Flying Dutchman from brooding. He was faced, he realised, with a dilemma, a conflict of interests. On the one hand, there was possibility that his wearisome and unduly extended lifespan would soon be terminated, and although he prided himself on being, in the circumstances, a reasonably well-balanced and sane individual, that would unquestionably be no bad thing. Life had become one long sherry party, and it was high time he made his excuses and left. But the problem was the great problem of tedious sherry parties. Just as you can see a way of getting out without actually having to knot tablecloths together and scramble out of a window, you meet someone you actually wouldn't mind talking to. And then, just as you're getting to know them and they're telling you all about whatever it is, it's time to leave. And the hostess is coming round, prizing glasses out of people's hands and switching off the music. The problem with human life, when it goes on for rather longer than it should do, is boredom. When it's boring and there's nothing to do, it's no fun. Just now, however, Vanderdecker had an uneasy feeling that his life was rather less boring than it had been for quite a number of centuries. And he could fairly certainly attribute the lack of tedium to the influence of that confounded accountant. Narrator's note. Ooh. He looked out of the helicopter window at Stirling Castle. He had left a hat there in 1742, but they'd probably disposed of it by now, and he tried to marshal his thoughts. Love? Love was a concept with which he was no longer comfortable. Now, at his age, it did not do to take anything too seriously, and the depressing thing about love was a seriousness which had to go with it. Just as these days you couldn't seem to get jumbo sausage and chips in a pub without a salad being thrown in as well. Supposing that a closer acquaintance with Jane Doland could make his life tolerable, that was by no means definitively established and required the further presupposition that Jane Doland was interested in making his life tolerable.
which was as certain as the abolition of income tax. Supposing all that, however, it remained to be said that Jane Dorland would die in 60-odd years' time, a mere Sunday afternoon in Vanderdecker's personal timescale, and then he would be right back where he was, sailing around the world, really smelly, with Johannes and Sebastian and Wilhelmus and the lads. Bugger that for a game of soldiers. That reminded him. The smell. Even if, by some unaccountable perversity in her nature, Jane were to wish to keep him company, what with the smell and all, that could only be done on board ship, and it certainly wasn't reasonable to expect Jane to come and live on the Verdammt for the rest of her life. And even if she did, would even her unusually stimulating presence be enough to make life on board that floating tomb anything but insufferable? Be realistic, Vanderdecker. Of course not. Then hey-ho for death by radiation, hey! But try as he might, he could not persuade his intransigent and pig-headed soul to accept the force of these arguments. He needed some final compelling reason, and try as he might, finding one proved to be as difficult as recovering something he had put in a safe place so as not to lose it 5 years ago. Narrator's note, we all know what happens to those, you'll never find it again. The very idea that he was doing all of this to save the population of Northern Europe from certain death was a pretty one to bounce about in the abandoned ballpark of his mind, but he had to admit that he couldn't find it in him to regard the big sleep with quite the same degree of naked hostility as most of his fellow creatures. There was also the horrid possibility, and quite a strong one, if one calculated the mathematical probability of it, that as soon as he and his fellow non-scientists started fooling about with the works of a nuclear reactor, the whole thing would go off-pop, drawing a line under Northern Europe, but leaving him and his colleagues with no worse effects than profound guilt. That wouldn't solve anything now, would it? The professor had spent most of... No, it's not. Seriously, I can't even... The professor had spent most of the journey with a calculator and a small portable Yamaha organ, to him interchangeable, fussing over some ingenious calculations or another. Now he had put them away and was nibbling at a rock cake. It was hard to know whether he was frightened, vacant, or just hungry. Vanderdecker caught his eye, and over the roar of the rotor blades they had their first sustained conversation for many centuries. "Wollen Montalban," said Vanderdecker, with as much good fellowship as he could muster. "What have you been getting up to since I saw you last?" The professor looked at him. "My work," he said. "Yes," Vanderdecker replied, "but apart from that." "Apart from my work?" "Yes," Vanderdecker said. "In your spare time, I mean. Hobbies, interesting people, good films, that sort of thing." "I'm afraid I've always been too busy to spare any time for amusements," said the professor, and his tone of voice made it clear that he didn't really understand the concepts that Vanderdecker was proposing to discuss, rather as Vanderdecker himself would have felt if someone had buttonholed him for serious discussion about the forthcoming World Tiddlywinks Championship. Narrator's note, it's a thing. "You mean you've been too busy?" "Yes." "Working?" "Yes." "I see." Vanderdecker didn't see at all. For all his sufferings, he had at least had a couple of days off every 7 years, and he wondered if there was any point in continuing with this particular conversation, since despite a vague foundation of shared experience, he doubted whether he had much in common with his old acquaintance. "I suppose," the professor said uneasily, "I owe you and your crew an apology." Vanderdecker sighed, and he shook his head. "Forget it," he said. 200 years ago, I might have wanted to break your shilly neck for you, but even grudges wear out in time, like Swiss watches. Besides, it was my fault as much as yours." "That's very gentlemanly of you," said the professor. "I don't suppose I would have taken such a reasonable view had I been in your position." "Yeah, think nothing of it," Vanderdecker said. "Besides, you are in our position. Well, sort of." He turned his head and looked out of the window. Sheep. Not exactly enthralling. "Actually," the professor continued, "there was one thing." "Yes?" "Your life insurance policy," he said nervously. "Have you considered—" "Oh, yes." Vanderdecker remembered. "That. What about it?" "Well," said the professor,
As you may be aware, I happen to own the bank that has the risk, and to cut to me if anything, well, unfortunate should happen at the power station. I see, Vanderdecker said, trying to keep himself from grinning. Yes, of course, there'd have to be a payout, wouldn't there? Bit awkward for you, I suppose, still. That's the insurance business for you. What I was wondering, said the professor, was who would be entitled to the proceeds. I don't suppose you've made a will by any chance? No, said Vanderdecker with restraint. I haven't. Rather irresponsible of me, I know, but it really did seem a trifle unnecessary. Well, it's a bit late now, isn't it? Besides, I never could be doing with lawyers. Did you ever meet a lawyer whose life you would willingly have saved in the event of fire? Not me. In which case, went on the professor, since you have no next of kin and no testamentary heirs, your estate will presumably revert to the public treasury of whichever country you happen to be a citizen of. Would that be Holland, do you know? Search me, Vanderdecker confessed. I'd leave that to the experts if I were you. I see what you mean about making a will, actually, although I still maintain that 40 quid spent on deciding what's going to happen after you're dead is a waste of good beer money. Still, it's not really any of my business now, is it? I mean, I'm not going to be here to see the fun. So what the hell do I care whether the Dutch government or the Lombard government... There isn't a Lombard government anymore, said the professor. Isn't there? Vanderdecker said. Oh, don't mind me. I only read the sports pages. The Italian government, then, who gives a damn? Jolly good luck to them, and I hope they don't fritter it all away on battleships. If you really don't care, said the professor cautiously, then might I suggest that you assign the policy back to the bank? It would save a lot of difficulties, you know, with the economy of the world and everything. Can I do that? Vanderdecker asked curiously. Just say who I want to have it. Very easily, said the professor. All you would have to do is fill in the little panel on the back of the policy document, unless you've done so already, of course. I don't know, Vanderdecker confessed, and he started to rummage about in his wallet again. This time he found a ticket stub for the first night of Aida. Slept. A library ticket. Jesus, Vanderdecker said. There'll be some fines to pay on that. A membership card for White's Coffee House, and a white £5 note before he unearthed the document itself. Where's this panel you were talking about? He said, scanning the vellum carefully. The professor pointed. It was blank. Just here, he said. That's right, said the professor. And I just fill it in, do I? Precisely, my dear fellow. Got a pen? The professor produced one from his jacket pocket. Something to rest on? Here, the professor said impatiently, and thrust a book of mathematical tables at him. Vanderdecker thanked him, wrote something in the panel, and signed his name with a flourish. The professor peered over his shoulder and then stared as Vanderdecker in belief. Although the Flying Dutchman's handwriting was usually about as intelligible as linear, hastily written with his left hand by a drunken scribe, the professor could clearly see that Vanderdecker had inserted Jane Dorland in the benefit of policy panel. Now then, Vanderdecker said, we'd better put this in a safe place, hadn't we? Just as well you reminded me, or I'd have had it in my wallet and when we went to the power station, and I don't imagine it would have lasted very long in there. And I think how I've been lugging this thing around with me all these years. It's a wonder it survived this long. He thought for a moment, and then put it back in his wallet, and went forward to have a word with the pilot. That's fine, Vanderdecker said, as he sat down again beside the professor. I explained it to the pilot that if I don't come back, he was to post it to Jane, care of Moss Berwick. I don't actually know her address, but I expect it'll reach her there all right. I mean, if you can't trust an accountant, who can you trust? But, spluttered the professor. It was a good thing you mentioned it, you know,
said the Flying Dutchman happily. To be honest with you, and this is of course in the strictest confidence, I think Miss Doland is getting rather fed up with her career in accountancy and wouldn't mind spreading her wings a bit. A nice little legacy might come in very handy, I imagine, although I assume she'll have to pay tax on it. Oh, I forgot, she's an accountant. They know about that sort of thing. That's all right then.
Do you realise, said the Professor, what you have just done?
Yes, Vanderdecker said.
No, you don't.
Actually, Vanderdecker said through a big smile, I do. I've entrusted the economic future of the free world. When I was a boy, the free world was anything Philip of Spain hadn't got its paws on yet, and precious little of it was too. Shows how things don't change much, doesn't it? On balance, though, I think Philip was a better bet than you, if you don't mind me saying so. At least he had interests outside his work. I think he collected the bones of saints, or was that Louis IX? The economic future of the free world, as I was saying, and all that sort of thing to a singularly clear-headed and conscientious person who will be able to look after it much better than either of us. No offence intended, Professor, but you've got rather too much of a vested interest for my liking, and most of all, you don't have any hobbies. Workaholic, I think they call it now. I never could stand workaholics. Now, we must be nearly there by now. Montalban quivered slightly, and then sat back on his hard vinyl-covered seat, breathing heavily. You're mad, he said. Sergeant Pepper to you, Vanderdecker replied affably. Oh, so nuts. Is that swing then I can see down there? Can't be far now. I'm really rather looking forward to this. Below them, the coastal mountains of Caithness ranged up into a bleak, wet sky. The first mate, who had slept soundly ever since the helicopter's rendezvous with the Verdammt, woke up, stretched his arm, and said, Are we nearly there yet? Nearly, Vanderdecker said. I can't see the sea. Big deal, grumbled the first mate. True, Vanderdecker said, but after it's over I'll buy you a pint. How does that grab you? Thanks, Skip, said the first mate eagerly. What exactly is it we're going to do? We're going to put out the fire, Vanderdecker said. Oh, the first mate frowned. Why? Why not? Oh, the first mate thought about it and could see no objection. And then you'll buy me a pint? If humanly possible, yes. Suits me, said the first mate, and he went back to sleep. Well, this is halfway through the chapter, and as much as I don't want to, I have to leave it here for today, and I'll hopefully be able to finish it off tomorrow or the next day. Hopefully. Fingers crossed, got to cross everything, fingers and everything like that. So, please take care of yourselves. Keep warm if you're too cold. Hydrate if you're too hot. Watch out for those allergies because they play in havoc with the heart, mind and soul. And take it easy, Petal. I'll talk to you soon.